Dario, and I do like your analogy with Pietra Male. It's an intriguing concept. Is data an explosive material or a force for good? Today we're going to talk about the future of data and identity credentials. I'm going to talk in this keynote mostly about identity, because identity is a form of collection of a very specific set of data, some of the most sensitive personal data about people, but in reality many of the thoughts and architectures extend all the way out through the data that people accumulate and generate throughout their lives. The things I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk at some length about the architectures of identities, because there are choices and the landscape is now changing with astounding rapidity. I'm going to talk about the issue of binding identities to physical human beings and some very specific challenges that are emerging there. We'll look a little bit about the threats, because it's important always to remember the risks that we as an industry run and have to protect our users against. And finally, we'll talk a little bit about the issues of privacy and the regulation thereof. Let's start by looking at a quick landscape of the architectures by which identity are managed. And there are really two axes here. As a former consultant, I naturally would have a two-axis map here. But it's an important way to understand what is really a very complex and sometimes very confusing landscape. Along the left-hand side we're seeing who controls the collection of attributes normally known as an identity. And clearly, the origins of identities resided with governments and public institutions. So government-issued identities are the foundation of much of order in our societies. We've seen the evolution towards private organizations operating commercially to create and deliver identity architectures. And we're now seeing an evolution towards personal data, towards individually control, towards the user owning and managing their own data. So the question of control and what in payments terms would be called issuance is there on the left. And along the bottom is the fundamental architecture for how that data is managed and controlled. On the left, you have a central place where all the credentials are held. Federated means that there are a number of nodes, each of which contains identity data about some people or some aspects of identity about people, and they interconnect technically together. And distributed means that there is a constellation of data centers, of collections of data, which can individually be used to provide confidence and trust to relying parties. And these are very different, and they've evolved over time. What I wanted here was to make this model concrete, was to give you some examples so that to consolidate into the real world how this model works. So centralized government-issued IDs, there are a number of very successful national digital identity platforms which form a single source of truth. One with which I'm very familiar is the SingPass system, operated by GovTech in the government of Singapore. All 4.5 million residents of Singapore are on a single national database, and they can use their SingPass identity to access government services and now to pretty much do anything within the economy. There are other examples of centralized services, but run privately. Some of the most successful in Scandinavia, in a number of countries of Scandinavia, you have Bank ID, which is a single transportable identity issued by a private organization, which is in fact a consortium of banks. And you can create and operate your bank account based upon your single bank ID. In the United States, there's a commercial organization called ID.me, which now has 100 million users signed up. And with your ID.me identity, you can access state unemployment benefits, you can access the IRS website, or you can check into an MGM hotel or get access to Veterans Administration capabilities. So these are commercially managed centralized IDs. Federated was thought to be the future. The largest and most successful one that I know of is the European eIDAS network, which is a network of private organizations, all certified under the eIDAS regulation and all interconnected and interoperable so that many relying parties can rely on any node within that network for the source of identity. It's a brilliant scheme. It hasn't been a huge success. It hasn't taken off enormously. We are now seeing in 2022 the final flowering of a dream that many people have had for over 10 years of the truly distributed network. Government issued and commercially managed one architecture for this, which we're seeing developed, for example, here in the United Kingdom by the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, are so-called trust frameworks. These were pioneered, I think, early on in Australia, for example. A trust framework is where you have numerous multiple identity schemes which actually don't interconnect with each other at all. They're not federated. They're set up for one particular purpose. But the key is that when you're a member of such a scheme, you can use the trust that is embedded in that scheme to get yourself another identity from another such scheme. So you can hop from scheme to scheme, relying on the trust that each one embeds. So it's highly distributed. It's not, but and I think we're going to see trust framework members created by the government. So the British government, for example, has committed itself to creating a number of uninterconnected digital identity schemes, which will, however, be members of the national digital identity trust framework. And many commercial organizations are intending to be members of that as well. And we see that in Australia as well. Government issued the MyGov ID in Australia is a government issued identity scheme. But it's a member of a trust framework and therefore part of a more distributed architecture. I talk about most current services. If we think about how identity actually works in the modern economy today, in many, many countries, every bank sets up its own digital identity for its own users. Every healthcare organization sets up its own digital identity for its own users. They don't syndicate, they don't federate, they create a silo. And this world of uninterconnected silos is actually the world of commercially managed, distributed identities. And it works, it has its advantages, it has many disadvantages, it's a bit of a pain. And it's very inconvenient for users. And that's why we have seen over the last 8 years the development of initially a vision and then some standards to create individually controlled distributed digital identities, which are now known as verified credentials. I'll talk about what that means in a minute. We've been talking about it for a number of years. I think the first major industry investment in verifiable credentials was actually the Good Health Pass initiative set up during COVID to attempt to create an international interoperable vaccination certificate. But the real flowering of this, I think, on a very large scale is potentially going to be the new eIDAS 2 program for the European Digital Identity Wallet, which the Commission is now investing in and pushing very rapidly. And I think we'll see develop over the next small number of years. So what exactly are these verifiable credentials? They are the consolidation and the implementation of something that were known for a number of years with a slightly more politically sounding title of self-sovereign identity. Stripped of its ideological functionality, what effectively it means is that different organizations issue credentials which are cryptographically signed. They are put into an identity wallet which is owned by and controlled by the citizen. The citizen obviously authenticates themselves when they want to apply it, and then they can supply attestations of those credentials to a relying party. One of the particularly elegant features of this method is that you don't actually need to disclose the full details of what's in your driving license, which would be, for example, a verifiable credential. You can just disclose facts about yourself, such as the fact that you're over 18 or that you are qualified to drive, using something known as a zero-knowledge proof. If you want to know more about that, it's called BBS Plus within the current standards. If you want to know a lot more about this, there is a wonderful paper that has been written describing this whole ecosystem in entirely comprehensible terms by Kalia Young, who's the doyen of this community and is here today. Kalia, if you put up your hand, people can come and ask you for your paper later on. As I said, we saw this also, as well as the Good Health Pass initiative, that we saw this flower first also with IATA, who insisted that W3C credentials should be used for their COVID wallet as well. So this is beginning to happen. Right, let's just talk for a second about the difference between identity and authentication, because sometimes these get muddled up. Identity is actually a dossier, a file of facts about a person. That's what stripped down to its essentials, that's what a digital identity is. But a file sitting on a desk in my mental picture has to be tied to a physical living human being, because that's where trust resides. Trust resides with people, not with files. And that moment of binding the identity attribute collection, whether it's centralized or federated or distributed, doesn't matter, to a physical human being, that is the moment of authentication. And today, increasingly, we're moving to a world in which face becomes a key mechanism for binding people to their digital attributes. Why? Because the root of so much trust in identity today arises from government-issued IDs, and the one thing in a government-issued ID worldwide that binds that ID to the person is their face. That's the only thing on most, not all, but most government-issued IDs that actually identifies who this really belongs to is their face. Faces also are proving to be super usable because you look at your device, it looks back at you, it's dead simple. The sensors in the form of cameras are everywhere. And the great thing about faces, as with all biometrics, is that they can't be copied, and despite what people will sometimes say, they can't be stolen. I have a particularly unpleasant habit at this point in my presentations of saying reminding people the only way you can steal someone's face is with a scalpel and a lot of blood. So that doesn't happen. They can be copied, but they can't be stolen. But faces, we are in a moment in which the politics of faces is a very live issue in the identity community. Public trust is, in some places, wobbling on the topic of faces. People are concerned about violations of their privacy, which could result from the processing of faces. And I think you'll see here some headlines. There was a very significant public affairs backlash in the United States recently when the IRS, using ID.me, required users to verify their identity with their faces in order to file their taxes. I think one of the things that we have to make clear in the digital identity and personal data community is that when we use faces, we use them to verify an assertion of an identity, not to identify people. We use them to verify people for their personal benefit, not to identify them. Personally, and this is my opinion, identifying people with their faces without their knowledge or consent is plain creepy, but that's just my opinion. Verifying them makes their lives better. And it's important, as we deal with the politics of face as a community, that we make that clear. I think one of the things that we have to, as an industry, always remember are the threats that arise, that are faced by citizens and organizations as a result of compromises to identity. The words that you're not seeing on this slide is fraud and fraud losses. It's very common for discussions about identity to collapse down just into discussions about fraud losses and the billions of dollars and the 2% of financial institutions' costs that are accounted for by fraud. And that is a challenge because sometimes fraud can be treated as a cost of doing business and therefore manageable. And what I want to show here is that actually there are evolving threats which are not manageable, that we as organizations and we as a society and we as a representative of this industry cannot consider to be acceptable costs of doing business. There are whole states who run their economies and in some cases their programs for the development of weapons of mass destruction using criminal theft and money laundering. And identity theft is a key component of that criminal enterprise. We have increasing numbers of people whose lives are being ruined, and at the same time, mass social damage is and has been caused by the propagation of malicious or incorrect information by anonymous or impersonating characters. And when a person's identity has been impersonated, when a citizen's identity has been impersonated, and something has been done or paid or said or attributed, it can ruin their lives and produce harm for years while they suffer the consequences and unwind the mess which occurs. And any kind of compromise of identity arising from poor access control and infiltration can bring down companies and fuel malicious attackers. Public trust in the tools that we build to defend against those harms and to empower citizens is absolutely fundamental. I think we believe that that there are two keys to establishing public trust. One is giving citizens agency. Agency means understanding, control, power to use their identities, powers to choose not to use their identities, power to decide what information is disclosed when, to put the citizen in control, not to make them helpless victims of corporate or government decisions. So giving citizens agency is one of the keys to winning their trust, and the other is transparency. Tell them what's being done, tell them what is not going to be done, ensure that there are no dark corners or covert activities, covert uses of surreptitious uses of their personal identities or their personal data. Transparency is the other key element of trust in our industry. And one of the main ways of providing agency is choice, the ability to say no. In Europe, under GDPR, in most cases, it is actually illegal to make many uses of personal data, especially biometric data, without the user's informed and withholdable consent. That is choice. At the same time, as an industry, we need clear regulations on this. In some cases, there aren't clear regulations. In some places, we are seeing a enforcement by class action lawsuit, which history tells us does not necessarily end well. Even in Europe, we have strict data privacy regulations, which I regard as a public good, because those strict regulations provide confidence and a sense of agency to users, but they must be kept fit for purpose. So my last point is, as an industry, I think we have an obligation to drive forward to ensure that old regulations are updated and new regulations, such as, for example, the new European laws on AI, which are currently under development and could potentially have a huge impact upon our industry, are built taking into account the principles of protection and respect and dignity of the citizen, but also fully understanding the requirements and possibilities of a modern world which is powered by machine learning and by AI, something that today is creating a degree of, there is a degree of ambiguity and challenge because of the rate of change of technology and the advance, particularly in the powers of machine learning and all the benefits that brings. We have to, I think, as an industry and as a group of industries, to help regulators ensure that the benefits of transparency, choice, and the power of technology help empower people to assert and use their identities for good. Thank you very much indeed.
Right, okay. Yes, I'm on. Are you on?
I think I'm on.
Good. Right, I think we've got about 7 minutes, so I'm going to ask one question, then I'm going to see if there's any from here, and then we'll also ask Dario if he's got any online questions that have come through. So, Andrew, you raised so many important questions there, but obviously we've got 2 days to debate this whole topic, so we can go through all those. And you're also coming back after lunch to talk more closely about biometrics and authentication. So, just a really quick question is, you described eIDAS, which is obviously just one of many identity systems which is coming out. Just to make it real for people, how would that actually look in practice when we have eIDAS 2 rolling out? First of all, how will organisations become part of this federated system? And how will the individual consumer upload or import their identity credentials, and how will they authenticate against them? Big question, but it's just, I'm trying to,
Yes.
make it practical reality.
I think the idea is that you'll so the fundamental concept is that you'll have, you as a citizen will have an electronic wallet. Mm-hmm. A little bit, the model is obviously the leather wallet that people carry around them, but it'll be an electronic wallet which will be supplied either by a state organization or by one of the large technology organizations or by a telco or by some company in this room. It's still not at all clear who is going to be the provider of the wallet. But the idea is that there will be mechanisms whereby you will be able to request from, say, a university or a vehicle licensing organization a copy of your key credential. Mm-hmm. And you'll be able to request it. You'll probably be able to, the workflows on this are different, so I won't drag you through it. But you'll be able to request it either indirectly or directly, and they will send into your wallet a certificate which contains all the information. So that'll kind of appear almost like a card in your wallet.
Right.
And so you'll have an online view which will show you all the credentials that you've now got in your wallet, which are things that people will need to know about you, and each one of them will be cryptographically signed to attest to their validity. And then when somebody wants to find out something about you, they will make an electronic request to your wallet. Right. And you will, and again, the workflows on this can vary, you will approve the release of the information to that requester of the answer to the specific question that they've asked.
Right.
So it'll be under your control. People won't be able to get information from your wallet without you requesting it. And so you'll see what they're asking and you'll be able to approve the release of that information.
And you'll download a wallet from the App Store?
Well, I believe the wallet will actually be sitting in the cloud. I mean, this is one of those things which probably will turn into one of those pointless, quasi-religious debates that we so much enjoy in our industry. Yeah. There will be those who assert that the wallet must only be on the device, and there will be those who assert that it must be in the cloud, for probably it doesn't matter a great deal. Personally, I'm a great fan of the cloud, because when you drop your phone in the toilet, as my son did the other day, it means that you don't lose you don't lose your entire life.
And the millions of citizens in the EU don't have smartphones or...
Well, as I say, if it's in the cloud, then you'll be able to get at it from any browser.
But what about if you don't have a browser? What about if you're
over
70 and you...
So this is about choice and agency. The issue of inclusion is incredibly important to governments. So what I think it will be, a lot of these, the political constructs around these solutions to gain public trust must not force people to have them. These are mechanisms that will make people's lives easier, faster, and more convenient. What's important is that they should never become instruments of exclusion for the people who don't have them. This is all about creating upside, not by opening up an abyss of downside.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, Eva is coming.
Am I on? So we talked about issuing credentials, and the owner of the wallet will be made aware of anything being issued. I think I'd love for you to discuss a little bit about what about the revocation or updating of credentials? How does that work?
So I've got to be a little bit careful not to speed off the edge of my knowledge horizon. How all this works are defined in the documents of the W3C Verifiable Credentials program, which run to hundreds of pages. I'm not a detailed enough expert on all of these mechanisms, but what I do know is that there are actually two models here, and the issue of revocation of credentials is very important. And there's a theory that credential issues will actually will push revocation certificates out to all the wallets to whom they've issued certificates. So when a revocation takes place or an expiry or a change, the issuer can push out the change to the wallets. There is an alternative theory, which is that the wallets can actually periodically poll the sources of data. And there is a model, which personally it makes most sense to me, where actually the wallets go and get the certificates in real time. The only problem with that is that there's a whole question about economic models, and we as MEF spend quite a lot of our time thinking about economic models. The economic models of the identity ecosystem, and especially the verifiable credentials ecosystem, still have to be completely invented. And one of the models is that the certificate issuer will charge every time they issue a certificate. Well, if the wallet has to go and get a certificate every time they use it, that potentially racks up the charges, something terrible. So I think that how the revocation issue works will depend a little bit upon what the economic model for certification is. And like so many other things in the world of verifiable credentials, that's not really been stabilized, it's been established yet. It's one of the many things that I think will be tested in the 4 demonstration programs that the European Commission is about to fund to experiment with the EU digital identity wallet. So we don't know the answer to that, but we'll soon find out.
I think we've got 1 more minute. So, Dario, do we have any online questions?
2, actually.
2. So, Susan, how are we doing for time? Do I need to?
No, you've got 2 more minutes. So if there's
2 minutes, okay.
questions in the room or online.
All right.
Well, if you have any questions to the people out there, we cover in 3 continents, I'm glad to say. But no questions for you, Andrew. You seem to have a light. Only one comment was very positive. And I blushed and I said, Joseph said, a masterclass.
There is 1 question in the room.
Oh, yeah, we'll have a question. A masterclass, clear and salient. So you definitely have an online fan club out there. But if you have additional questions, Lee has got 1. If not, remember to send it. I'm looking online if you have.
Hi, Andrew. It's Lee Suka from Cinch. So thank you for your presentation. Many exciting questions to ask, but I'll ask one. You talk about the politics of faith. I conjecture there's a bigger issue, the politics of trust, choice, and agency. But my question is, can this ever move from theory to mass adoption?
So the answer is we are seeing rapidly a digital identity revolution taking place worldwide right now. To an extent, it's been driven, frankly, by the pandemic, because so many processes had to move not just away from the branch, but what I hypothesize is the old paper-based approach to processing transactions, in which people would fill out forms, and the forms would go to offices, and the documents would then pass across desks in the offices, broke down when the offices were empty because everyone had been sent home. That is one possibility. What we have seen is a tremendous growth in digital identity now across the world. So has this taken off? SingPass is ubiquitous in Singapore. The rate of adoption of MyGov ID in Australia has been spectacular. The digital identification, that's a word I just made up, by the way, for those who are not English, of Italy has been one of the most spectacular phenomena in the world of digital identity anyway. In the space of, I think, about 2 years, SPID, the National Digital Identity, has gone, I think, to 20 or 30 million people. So a high proportion of the adult Italian population. We've seen also the success of commercial models. So, for example, in the UK, a company called Third Fort launched a digital identity passport for the purposes of real estate transactions, simplifying the process of KYC in one particular vertical. Spectacular success. Bank ID has for a long time been a poster child in Scandinavia. All over Europe, ID.me has been a phenomenon in the United States. They've gone from very few to 100 million users in something like 2 years, powered by the pandemic. All over the world, we're seeing large-scale digital identity programs come into being. So there is no doubt that there is a hunger and a demand for well-designed systems. all of those organizations that I've just described have their own economic model. In some cases, they're government models, and in some cases, they are very successful private sector models. What I think still remains to be seen is whether we will see the successful emergence on a large scale and with commercial success of verifiable credentials. We've been talking about verifiable credentials for I think 6 or 8 years. I think I first talked to Kalia about this over 10 years ago. There's not been a real driving business model for it up until now, but there are, for the first time, some companies actually making money out of verifiable credential, companies in the UK such as Nuggets. So we're starting to see that, and I don't see any reason for skepticism that the verifiable credential identity businesses will be any less successful than their centralized and federated predecessors.
Okay, well, we have we got time for one more? Yeah, okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm Tor Sovik with the campaign registry in the US. My question is about businesses and verifiable credentials. You talked about individuals. So I'm wondering, is there any driver for making businesses have verifiable credentials? Will it happen? And if so, what will make it happen?
That's a really interesting question. Know your business is becoming a big market opportunity. It is, as we like to say within iProov, a reassuringly hard problem. And reassuringly hard problems are great for making money. Already under EIDAS-1, the success of EIDAS-1 has really not, in fact, flowered in the area of digital identity, but in the area of digital signatures. And the EIDAS-1 issues electronic signatures for people, and it's been very successful. So you've got people like It's Me in Belgium and SK Identity in Estonia, who really, and Nemirial in Italy, who've done very well out of issuing e-signatures for individuals. The same model provides e-seals for companies, electronic signatures for companies. There is no doubt that there is an absolutely burning need for digital identities for businesses. And there is no doubt that the verifiable credential model will be applied to companies. But remember that that's just a different set of information within the dossier. There is always the problem of authentication, and people, in the end, always authenticate to documents. So the complexity in business verifiable credentials is the authorization architecture, in which you decide which human beings are allowed to authenticate for the release of business credentials. But there's absolutely no doubt that verifiable credentials, I think, will have a tremendous impact in the business area.
Cool. Okay, well, Andrew will be back after lunch to talk about authentication biometrics. I think Kalia's on later this morning, so she'll go more deeply into some of the weeds that we've been talking about of various systems. So thank you very much, Andrew.